Introducing you to Vietnam. Vietnam is one of the countries in Southeast Asian region which is located on the eastern margin of Indigenous Peninsula and occupy about 331,211.6 square kilometers of land with a population about 98 million in 2022. Vietnam is neighboring country to Cambodia in the west, to the north with China and Laos, and facing South China Sea in the east and south. Vietnam is a socialist state, which means the government plan the economic, regulate the market, focus on equality and social welfare of the people. Currently, the capital city of Vietnam is Hanoi. However, Vietnam also have other main cities like Ho Chi Minh, also known as Saigon. Furthermore, Vietnam has no official religion. Their people have free will to follow any religion they like. However, it can be seen among the people that many follow Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. As we all know, Southeast Asia has been a popular region for investors to invest in the past couple of years due to its growing economic in the Southeast Asia. And we will take Vietnam as an example. Is Vietnam a good country to invest in? Vietnam economic is one of the fastest growing economic in Southeast Asia. Over the past few years, Vietnam has shown significant growth in GDP per capita, and Human Development Index. The country growth is the result of its export-led model, which made some investors calling it the second China. We can see that electronics manufacturing was one of Vietnam's biggest and most significant imports. Furthermore, with the free trade agreement has also played a role for Vietnam to maintain a good trade relationship with other countries such as the recent RCEP FTA as well as joining ASEAN, which made Vietnam accessible to free market in the Asian region.
Let us have a look at Vietnam's economic indicators. GDP or gross domestic product is the measurement of total goods or services within the border of a country in a given period of time. The graph of Vietnam has left a remarkable impression on other countries because this country's GDP has been increasing at a very slow pace. However, like every other country, Vietnam also suffered from poverty, causing their GDP to decline significantly in the 1989s. What contributed most in Vietnam's economic growth among the agriculture, fishery, and forestry is its agriculture industry with an increase of 2.43% of 2.99%, contribute almost 4% of the overall growth rate, while industry and construction increased it by 9.44% is almost 42% of Vietnam's GDP structure, and the manufacturing sector is also one of its drivers with 10.69% growth rate. However, this plunge didn't last long and its GDP rapidly grew slowly until it reached its peak in 2021 at 362 billion USD. Next thing we should focus on is Vietnam's GNP or gross national product. That is the total of value of final goods and services produced by the country's economy during 1 year. Vietnam's GNP does not meet a decline just like its GDP, and its peak is almost 350 billion USD. Thus, this means that Vietnam has better living standards, and also it's a signal that this country is increasing in trade, international financial operations, and production. Human Development Index is also one of the elements that is needed to emphasize human capacity in developing a country. It describes the measurement of how humans are able to achieve, such as the state of health, education levels, quality of life, and their life expectancy. Vietnam's HDI value almost seems stable throughout the years. Vietnam has been recognized as one of the countries that has succeeded in poverty alleviation, meaning they have succeeded in reducing their poverty rate by more than half in just 10 years. Since 2019, its HDI value has risen to 0.704, which is the highest value of all, and that is when Vietnam has entered the list of the countries that have the highest growth rate of human development in the world. In this HDI term, Vietnam is considered best in maintaining their citizens' educational rate, health, and even the unemployment rate is low. and its rural development, which has 100% of their electrification reach all of its population. They have all their primary teachers trained as well. Moving on to Consumer Price Index, or in other words CPI, is the measurement over time of the overall change in consumer prices fixed on a typical basket of goods or services. For the last 4 years, this country's consumer price index has shown a time curve of ups and downs until it reached its peak at almost 110 in 2022. Just like any other countries, Vietnam is also impacted by the epidemic that caused its CPI to drop roughly to 101.97 in May 2020. This shows that Vietnam has indeed suffered some difficulties during the epidemic period. However, Vietnam has managed to recover over the last 2 years, so the investor can assume that it's still worth to invest in Vietnam.
The other factor of economic indicator is balance of trade, in other words, BOT. Vietnam have been reporting trade surplus more frequently as the country export growth has been stronger than import growth. As you can see in the graph, from a gain of $1.3 billion in the same month a year prior, Vietnam trade surplus declined to $0.78 billion in November 2022. According to preliminary figure, the third rating global demand caused an 8.4% decline in export to 29.18 billion, while import decreased at a softer 7.3% to 28.4 billion. It was the smallest trade surplus in July, as export decreased more than import. The trade saw in gold a surplus of 10.6 billion, with export and import rising in the prior year. However, Vietnam is the openest country. The trade openness in Vietnam, in order to define the trade openness, is defined as the ratio or relationship between export and import over GDP. Vietnam is quickly becoming one of the South Asia most promising location for manufacturers. According to VN Express from the Fixed Solution researcher, Vietnam ranked 5th in economic openness among 35 countries in South Asia, and stand with the developing countries such as Singapore, Hong Kong, Macau, and Malaysia. Now have a look at the inflation rate of Vietnam. The inflation rate is the rate of increase in price of goods and services over a period of time. Furthermore, Vietnam inflation is so high because of high cost of transportation, and commodities such as fertilizer and animal feed can respite for the broader range of goods and services. The annual inflation rate in Vietnam increased from 4.30% in October to 4.37% in November 2022.
In Vietnam, people cannot own the land, but it's regulated by the government, so foreigners wouldn't be able to completely own the land if the law wasn't stated. The features of using the land are restraints for those who do not obey the law. In regulation, foreigners and Vietnamese only have the land use right, but they cannot own the land. So, how many options for foreigners to use the land? There are some requirements for acquiring the land, such as business registration, business plan approval, and also the capital charter. So, investors need to prove that their company will have the business plan to make a cash flow in this land. If the investor want to use the land, they have two options. One is to set up the LLC, and the second one is to use a nominee. Well, a lot of companies and individual investors acquire the land after entering Vietnam. Additionally, if some people wish to invest around 1 or 2 years, they can use nominee to hold the title, which is the same rule for local in Vietnam. Furthermore, for the long-term period, the landowners are asked to set up with the LLC. LLC stands for Limited Liability Company, which is the company that offers legal protections of business. Foreigners can have the land for up to 50 years, and it can be seen that if the government needs the land for the city planning, the land will be taken. However, the government will compensate for the rest of the ownership based on the market price or negotiation price. The second point is business ownership. A foreign entrepreneur is allowed to create a company with 100% foreign capital in Vietnam. An investment certificate must be acquired from the Vietnam authority before running a business. An economic enterprise with overseas funds is permitted to conduct its procedures in Vietnam with the support of an investment certificate or license issued by the Vietnamese government. So, certificate of registration enables investors to capture the business.
When we talk about Vietnam's economy, mostly we hear the word "đói moi." So, "đói moi" is the name given to the economic reform initiated in Vietnam in 1986 with the goal of creating a socialist-oriented market economy. The aim of "đói moi" reform was to create a socialist-oriented market economy. After the South and North Vietnam reunited, Vietnam grew more and more reliant on the Soviet Union for political, economic, and military support. However, during the mid-80s, there was a depression in power for the Soviet Union, so they could not provide aid for Vietnam, and this led to political and economic reform. "Đói moi" was imposed upon Vietnam's government for the welfare of the nation. There are three main steps of "đói moi." First, it has embraced trade liberalization with Gasto. Second, it has complemented external liberalization with domestic reform through deregulation and lowering the cost of doing business. Finally, Vietnam has invested heavily in infrastructure and human capital, predominantly through public investment. So, what are the impacts of "đói moi" in Vietnam's economy nowadays? In 1995 and 1996, respectively, real household income per capita increased by 5% and 4.2%. By 1998, less than 30% of people were living in poverty, down from about 55% in 1992, this according to the World Bank. In comparison to the top quintile's annual rise of 6.8% between 1994 and 1996, its income per capita increased by only 0.5% during that time. The country's average per capita GDP was projected to be around $150 per year, while the statutory minimum salary for local workers employed by foreign invested business was $35 per month in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi and $30 elsewhere. Vietnam used to be a food insecure nation, but because of huge development in its agricultural sector, it is now one of the biggest exporters of rice, coffee, rubber, cashew, pepper, and seafood in the world. To fulfill the rising need of both businesses and individuals, services ranging from banking, finance, and legal advice to tourism and telecommunication have prospered. Infrastructure in the area of transportation, power, information, telecommunication, and urban, educational, and medical facilities has seen significant advancement. Due to its current economic situation, Vietnam has boosted in its budget, mobilized resources, and achieved many of the UN Millennium Development Goals earlier than expected. The more path over the past 30 years has involved through integration into the global economy on a variety of levels, while adhering to universal norms and ideals. Vietnam has created numerous businesses alliances with accordance with its WTO commitment. The nation vigorously constructed the Asian Community 2015 and finished its internal market. Vietnam market economy has been recognized by 59 nations as of this writing, including many large trading partners. Vietnam has signed 10 regional and bilateral free trade agreements (FTAs), including 6 as an Asian member state and 4 as an independent party. Vietnam has taken part in the 3 value chains that are particularly significant to the world economy: the value chain of food and food security, the value chain of energy and energy security, and the value chain of apparel, textile, and footwear. These successes were credited to shift in the party's mindset on the inevitable development of a market economy and the choice to switch from a centrally planned economy in a socialist-oriented market economy.
that emphasize economic development as a one fundamental task.
In this part of the video, I will be going over Vietnam's exports. As we can see in recent years, phones and electronics are Vietnam's top export, totaling over $100 billion. Vietnam has become a great place to manufacture electronics, phones, and computer due to its cheap labor force and tax incentives. One of the biggest investors in this industry is Samsung. According to a report done by Reuters, Samsung has an investment plan in Vietnam totaling $20 billion USD. And LG will also make a multi-billion-dollar investment into the country in order to set up production plants for cameras. So, Vietnam is becoming a popular place for tech companies to set up production or to build a tech company there in order to sell your tech to big companies such as Samsung and LG. Moving on is the textiles and footwear industry. This industry is also very integral to Vietnam's economy. According to Vietnam Briefing, the textile and footwear sector employs 2.5 million garment workers and has over 6,000 garment companies. Vietnam has overtaken Bangladesh as the second biggest ready-made garment exporter in the world, and as China's wages rise even further, it is most likely that Vietnam will inherit most of the garment manufacturing. Now, let's discuss Vietnam's free trade agreement. Vietnam has quite a few selection of free trade agreements. The obvious one is the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, which Vietnam agreed upon on the 15th December 1995. This has helped Vietnam's import and exports in the ASEAN region. Next is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is the largest free trade agreement in the world. It is a free trade agreement that works hand in hand with Australia's free trade agreements with 14 Indo-Pacific countries. According to the World Bank, Vietnam is expected to benefit the most from this free trade agreement. According to Vietnam's Ministry of Trade and Industry, Vietnam's income rose by 4.9%, exports increases by 11.4%, and imports rose by 9.2% due to this free trade agreement. Sectors such as motorized vehicles, garments, and textiles benefited the most from these non-tariff measures from the RCEP free trade agreement.
The year 2021 in Vietnam was undoubtedly one of the most difficult years thus far. Vietnam received praise from all over the world for containing the epidemic in 2020, but the Delta variant was revealed to be too aggressive, leading to tight lockdowns, halted manufacturing, and damaged supply networks. While the majority of Western nations endured a painful 2020, Vietnam saw a difficult 2021 as the pandemic severely affected its GDP, having a substantial impact on both enterprises and citizens. Businesses and individuals were significantly impacted by the pandemic's fourth wave. People were only permitted to leave their homes for emergency during the extreme lockdown that was imposed on the majority of the nation. Businesses and factories have to undertake either a one-road, two-destination model, where employees remain in dorms or hotels and are carried by company vehicles to and from the work site, or a three-on-site work model where people eat, sleep, and work on site. Businesses had a lot of trouble organizing this quickly, which raised prices because they had to arrange accommodation and prepare food on site. Several factories had to close as a result. Even with this strategy, COVID-19 infections among multiple workers led to the closing of operations. Furthermore, the problem was made worse by the severe mobility limitation, which led to heightened testings of truck drivers and items that were stranded at ports, industries, and warehouses, causing supply chain issues. Due to the globalization of supply chain networks and the fact that many of them are overly reliant on production hubs and important markets, particularly in China, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to light the dangers of interrupted and late supplies of essential goods and equipment. Changing investment and supply chain aims to disperse and lower risk in addition to optimizing production and cost. Now for our normative suggestion. Businesses will need to adapt, diversify, and search for cost-saving ways to make sure that their supply networks are resilient. Additionally, while the supply chain is a problem, ports in the US and other regions are overflowing with containers that cannot reach their destination. Depending on the type of industry and raw materials, businesses must consider alternative sites to ensure contingency preparations are maintained. Companies should use the chance to establish a trustworthy supply chain and secure future ambitions.
Hello everyone!
My name is Rachana and I'm responsible for the introduction of Vietnam.
And I am Sreypich.
And my name is Sonita. We're both covering about the economic indicator.
My name is Chenda. I'm responsible for property rate.
My name is Huyjing and I'm responsible for the normal reform.
My name is Phousovitou and I cover Vietnam's exports and free trade agreements.
My name is Eminency and I covered the Vietnam's challenge and the normative suggestion.
And that is all for our video. Don't forget to share and like, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.
Bye.